Hi, I'm Kiernan Schmidt, and this is Out of Office, a travel podcast. This seat taken? As you can tell from the brand new opening here in the new year, 2019, Ryan Davis is gone out of here. You know, I just decided that guy was bringing no value to this podcast. This is really meant to be more of a one-man show. So, in 2019, we resolved to say bye-bye, Ryan J. That might come to a surprise to him because I didn't tell. I told him I'd handle this week by myself. So for all of you who just got your hopes up, I'm sorry. It was a joke. Ryan Davis will absolutely be back. He's an essential part of this show. I mean, to me, it's like asking a plane to fly without the propellers. So Happy New Year, everybody. I hope that the corks popped. I hoped that the kissing at midnight never stopped. I hope that brows were mopped from all the dancing that you did. And I hope that in the new year, the best pictures of you will be well cropped. So Ryan and I decided that instead of muddling through yet another episode in Christmas week, we would answer fans' requests for a little more from my interview with Mark Adams, author of Tip of the Iceberg: My 3,000-Mile Journey Around Wild Alaska. And folks will remember a few weeks ago, I talked to Mark all about the making of this book, where he retraces a historic expedition across Alaska. It happened in 1899 when a railroad magnate, Edward Harriman, was ordered to take the summer off and instead custom built a beautiful steamship and got all of the finest scientific minds of the day to travel around Alaska with him. He had John Muir, John Burroughs, the Johns, the key Johns. He had George Bird Grinnell, William Dahl, and a whole host of other characters. And for time reasons, I couldn't get to all of the great questions that we had asked and Mark had answered about, what makes Alaska so distinctive. What's it like traveling around in a country that, has more birds and bears than human beings? So with that, we will revisit my interview with Mark Adams, author of the wonderful book, Tip of the Iceberg.
Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff, please.
You went with what they call paranoia, where, you were obviously feeling some fear about coming into contact with a bear. So how do you prepare for that? What training do you go through? What gear do you need to have to feel safe in the untamed Alaskan wilderness where bears are aplenty?
Well, before I went into Glacier Bay several days with a guide, and we just were kayaking around a la John Muir, the National Park Service makes you go through the training of how to deal with bears. And brown bears is the predominant type of bears in Glacier Bay. And you have to learn to put your food in a bear canister and keep that at least 100 yards away from your campsite. Don't leave any, scraps of food near your tent, because then the bears are going to come rummaging around. If the bear does show up, try to make some noise, clap your hands, scream, scare the bear away if you can. They make it sound like a fairly, genial process. It's like, oh, the bear will understand if you, ring your little anti-bear bells or whatever. But they also make you bring this thing called bear spray, which is like pepper spray, like the equivalent of what we would have as mace in New York City. And if the bear does charge you, if it gets within, I think it's 10 feet, and a bear can move 30 miles an hour, much faster than a human, then you're supposed to spray it in the bear's face, and the bear will back off like a would-be mugger.
I actually, when I went to Denali National Park a couple years ago, went to one of these training sessions, and a woman raised her hand to ask a ranger. She said, "Now, before I go out, how much of the bear spray should I put on myself?" Because she thought that it was like bug spray. And the Rangers, I mean, took a moment to laugh and then said, actually, we think that some of the bears have developed a taste for this like peppery seasoning if you put it directly on yourself.
Alaskans like to joke about how little outsiders know about bears, because they sell these bells that are like the kind of thing you'd see a court jester using in a medieval painting or something. And if you are silly enough to bring these bells out on a hike or something, some Alaskan is going to stop you and say, the bear just hears that as a call for dinner.
Right.
So it's taken as a given that outsiders are going to have some trouble dealing with bears if they have to, which is why the most important thing I brought with me was a native Alaskan guide.
Yeah, right. And how about bald eagles? Did you see many of those?
I did. When I first got to Ketchikan, which was like the first city of any size that you reach in Alaska, when we pulled in, there's like this bald eagle soars in, snatches a salmon, and flies away. And I'm like, wow, that's so Alaska. I may never see another bald eagle again. And then by the time I got out to Dutch Harbor in the Aleutians, the bald eagles are like pigeons. They're like everywhere. There's a guy out there shooing the bald eagles off the king crab, traps. It's like, get out of here.
That's great.
Yeah.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about how, one thing that we love to talk about on the podcast is how to plan a trip. And I think that a good amount of planning going in means that you can wring the most learning, the most excitement out of a trip. I've been accused of being an over planner. So when you're looking at these expeditions that are, months long, incredibly complicated logistics, where do you even start?
I start with the traditional guidebooks. If I'm going to a place like Machu Picchu, which I've written about, I'll get a standard Peru guidebook from, A Lonely Planet, for example, or Rough Guides, that sort of thing. National Geographic does excellent guidebooks for places like that. And that's certainly the case with a place like Alaska, because if you start going online for advice, what I found is that a lot of this stuff is written by people who've never actually been there.
Yeah.
They've got these content factories just churning this stuff out, picking up pieces of information somewhere else and passing it along. One example was, you read all these stories about taking the marine ferries. It's like, oh, you can sleep out on a chaise longue out on the back deck, and everybody does that, and it's wonderful. Just bring a blanket. And I was on like a dozen different ferries, and I never saw a chaise on a single one. I was sleeping on the floor in a sleeping bag, on the deck. So, they're not 100% reliable, but they're a very good base from which to work. And once you see information repeated 2 or 3 times, you can guess that the information in guidebooks, then it's probably fairly reliable, and then you can use that as your springboard for other stuff.
So you're saying that there's still a place in this internet age for fact checking and editorial judgment.
Yes, very much so.
That is a revelation. And how about packing for a trip like this? You know that you're going to encounter a lot of the unexpected. What is the must-have gear?
Well, obviously, lean and mean is best. Drip dry clothes, bag that you can carry on your back, because especially in a place like Alaska, you arrive in Ketchikan, you're a mile or so outside of town. So you need something you can throw on your back. You're not going to be walking down, the streets of Ketchikan with a roller bag. Yeah. Compression bags are essential for getting stuff down to the smallest size possible. You got to have that fleece that can be tucked into its sleeve to use as a pillow, and in Alaska, you need rain gear. You definitely like a serious jacket. And if you're going, kayaking or anything like that, you're probably going to need rain pants as well, and maybe some rubber boots.
Oh, I love rain pants. That anytime I have any outdoor activity on a trip, I pack those rain pants. I feel like there's more joy in my life than having it pouring, having other people be miserable and wet, and I'm sitting there with that shit-eating grin on my face, dry as a bone. I also think, you are not guilty of over planning. I think, you have what you want to hit, and you tell one story in the book about the Valley of 10,000 Smokes. And you have an encounter there that I want you to talk about, because it's something that I think I need to learn more about when trying to, check off every box of a trip.
Yeah. Well, in the Valley of 10,000 Smokes, which is a place very few people get, it's in Katmai National Park. Some people go to Katmai because there's a place called Brooks Lodge, which is like the world's best place to look at brown bears for a few weeks out of the year. There's so much salmon there that they're just stuffing their faces and they just completely ignore you, and you can almost walk right up to them.
Yeah, the famous bear cam, and this year they did Fat Bear Week, just took over the internet.
Well, if you do watch the bear cam, you'll notice it's very green and lush there in the summer. But if you go deeper into the park, there's a place called the Valley of 10,000 Smokes, and it's called this because 100 years ago or so, a fellow named Griggs went in there on a National Geographic expedition and noticed that the Nova Rupta volcanic explosion of 1912, which is the biggest volcanic eruption of the 20th century, had buried what had been a lush green valley in several hundred feet of smoldering ash. And while it no longer smolders, it's still completely obliterated. It really is as if someone had just dumped a full ashtray in the middle of Katmai National Park.
Oh. They should really hire you to write the travel guide, the tourist material.
The thing is, there's nobody there. It's this huge valley with these, mountains, and there's no plants, there's no animals. But it's eerie, and if you plan correctly, which was my idea, you can walk right up to the sort of sulfur stinking, still smoldering remains of the Nova Rupta crater, which looks like the woofer on a car stereo. And I really, really wanted to see it because I'd seen pictures, and we hiked around through 10,000 Smokes for a few days. The problem with Katmai National Park is they have these things called williwaws, which are totally unpredictable, super strong winds. And they started to kick up, and we got a message from our pilot saying, look, if you guys don't get back to the landing strip over by the river in the next 6 hours, you might be stuck out there for a week in this, essentially, monsoon in the middle of nowhere. And we had enough food, but it was like, okay, the best case scenario is we hike up to a USGS cabin at the top of that mountain, and it's going to take us all night. And we're going to have to hike up there in the rain. And then we hang out there, just, you and me and my guide for a week. And then maybe if it clears up in a week, we can come out. It's not like you're going to be there checking your email. There's nothing to do. There's no cell signal. I didn't bring anything to read. So we were like 20 minutes walk from Nova Rupta when this happened. And my guide was like, you're the client here. You make the call. We can go see Nova Rupta and then take our chances, or we can start heading back to the strip now, and we'll have a better chance of making it out of here. And, I knew from all my years of editing stories at places like National Geographic Adventure and Men's Journal, the hardest decision to make is when, not when you're at the peak of Mount Everest, it's when you're 200, 300 feet below the peak of Mount Everest, and you've been training for 6 months to get there, but you know that you have a much better chance of getting down if you just turn around right now and give up the bragging rights. And that's what we did. We just pulled out. We're like, okay, let's get out of here now. And man, those last 30 minutes or so waiting for that plane to arrive was nuts watching the sky. It was like watching the sky psyching itself up for a fight.
Yeah.
I never want to live through that again.
Well, my wife calls those moments reasons to go back. So someday maybe you'll get back there.
Yeah, I'm never going back to that.
And because you do so much historical research and then go out and experience it yourself, there's just a huge amount of information to organize. McPhee famously uses note cards where he, you get the sense that this man lives in a hoarder's mansion of note cards around him, and will go out and actually lay out the physical structures that you're describing. So how do you go about organizing all that information outside your head?
I use a lot of mind mapping. I do use a lot of outlines once I have all the information. And sometimes I'll start, outlining chapters, before I even leave the house. It's like, okay, well, on a trip like the Harriman expedition, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to be going to Ketchikan. I'm going to go to Juneau. I'm going to go to Skagway. I'm going to spend some time in Anchorage. I'll have to go to Fairbanks for this. How do I, knit the connective tissue that's going to keep those chapters rolling and not be like, chapter 1, I did this, chapter 1, I did that, chapter 3, I did the other thing. So that's when you start reaching into your bag of historical information and say, hey, can I compare my experiences to what they did? Can I use, their interesting tales of getting from point A to point B as that connective tissue? Paul Theroux, in one of his books, I think it might be The Old Patagonian Express, he starts out by saying, travel narratives leave out the parts that I want to read, which are, how did you get from, Boston down to Guatemala without ever getting on an airplane? That's the interesting stuff as far as I'm concerned. Who did you meet? What are what's the trouble you got into along the way? Don't just tell me what the castle looks like once you get there or the volcano. Tell me the steps in between, because that's what people want to know.
And what physical space do you write in?
Well, I have an office. I have a pretty awesome office now. It's in an old 1920s factory building with a high ceiling and giant windows. But for 10 years, I wrote 3 books in a little tiny office that looked like like the inside of an ice fishing cabin, essentially. And the only reason I left that office is because the ceiling leaked, and I'm about 90% sure there was mold in the walls, and it got to the point where I couldn't breathe. And I was like, I don't think this office is supposed to make me sick.
I don't know, though. You have all your waterproof gear. It seems like you could have lived through it.
I didn't have a respirator.
And do you paper your office with all these historical pictures, with the books, with the research, with a giant map? I mean, how do you kind of ensconce yourself before you get out on the road?
No, I mean, basically, I've just got stacks and stacks of books and papers. It's like, how people have gotten into the habit of making cairns when they, find rocks in a river. That's what I've got. I've got cairns all over my desk and all over the floor of books and folders and stuff like that. And a big whiteboard. The whiteboard is essential for, plotting stuff out. I might do, one chapter at a time. It's like, okay, I got to get this character in, and I got to get this scene in and this place. And, here's a detail that I haven't found a spot for yet, but I will find a spot for.
And are you often finding that you kind of hit that outline right on the first try, or have you gotten far into chapters and had to go back?
No, absolutely not. I mean, even when you sell a book proposal, that's just a starting point. When I did my Machu Picchu book, when people read that book, their favorite character by far is my guide, this Australian guy named John Levers, who was actually just here at my house a few months ago. And, John is, like 40% of the book. He wasn't in the proposal. I had never heard of John Levers when I sold that book. So, when something good comes along, you just change the plan. The outline is just, it's the basic recipe, and then you start adding things in and taking things out. There was this fish and wildlife boat of biologists that went out to the Aleutian Islands, out to the Pribilof Islands in Alaska. And when I was, doing the legwork to get ready for the trip, because it takes longer to prepare for the trip than it is to take the actual trip. It takes months and months contacting people and sussing out where to go. I was convinced that I had to get on this ship. I was like, if I don't get on that ship, if I don't get on that boat, I'm not going to be able to get from 80% of the way through the book to the ending. I convinced myself that was the bridge, and in the end, they wouldn't let me on, and it was fine. I found it's probably something better. So don't get, if you are writing about something, don't get so fixated on the things you think are important. Just go out as a camera, as Christopher Isherwood said, and just be that camera with the lens open, and then just take it all in, write it all down, take all the pictures, and then sort through it when you get back.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the last stop on this train. Everyone, please leave the train.
All right. Well, thank you very much again to Mark Adams, author of Tip of the Iceberg, my 3,000-mile journey around wild Alaska. Folks may know my travels in Alaska are one of my fondest memories, and I highly recommend the book for anyone that's heading to Alaska or has a soft spot for it. It's a wonderful way to kind of build that excitement, anticipation, and wanderlust that we're always talking about here on Out of Office. And sadly, now that the holidays are over, next week we're going to be tackling a great topic that applies just perfectly to this time of year, which is how to get over post-vacation depression. Until then, I'm Kiernan Schmidt. Ryan Davis will be back next week, and this is Out of Office, a travel podcast. This seat taken,